Tonight's mailbag will focus on just one topic. It's a little complicated, very interesting, and it could be amazing or terrible. It's probably going to be one of those two things. So let's talk sovereign wealth funds. So a few weeks ago, President Trump signed an executive order to create a sovereign wealth fund, and he thinks it could be a real game changer.
We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. We have a lot of things that create wealth, and you're seeing that over the last 2 weeks. I think we've created more wealth. Other people have created de-wealth. The people, my predecessors, we're creating a lot of wealth.
Yeah, my kids are always de-wealthing me. All right. So what is a sovereign wealth fund? How does it create a lot of wealth? And if they're so darn wonderful, why don't we have one already? Well, you can think of it simply as a government-backed investment account. Lots of countries have them, and the big ones are worth trillions of dollars. Norway, China, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and a whole bunch of others. Now, you may notice something as you take a look at the flags there that Ken figured out. A viewer named Ken, he said, quote, nearly all sovereign wealth funds get their funding from the sale of some finite asset, such as oil or land. And he's exactly right about that. See, these funds originated, they first got going in oil-rich countries because oil makes you rich. So every year they made tons and tons of money, and it piled up. The cash was in a vault like Scrooge McDuck. But as any good financial planner or TikToker will tell you, it's better to put your money to work for you, to invest it. Norway's fund started doing this. It started in the late 90s. They took their oil money, paid all their bills, then they invested the rest. And today it's worth nearly $2 trillion. Now, if the U.S. created something like that, it could use that revenue to do so many wonderful things. Fund Social Security, education, healthcare, VA hospitals, roads, bridges, the list goes on and on. Take your pick. But as another viewer noticed, the U.S. isn't stockpiling money, are we? We're not one of those oil-rich countries. When we're done paying our bills, we don't have any leftover money to invest. We're broke. Peter asked, how does this fund work when we have such a tremendous debt burden as a nation? And it is a really valid and good question. So basically, we're going to have to take money that would go to the debt and invest it instead. And it's not really clear where that money is going to come from. Tariffs, maybe? Selling government assets, things like land? Or borrowing it? I talked to NC State professor Mark Nance about how that might work.
Wherever the money comes from, instead of paying down that debt, we're investing it. And you're right that in the long run, what we're doing is betting that the returns on the investment are worth more than the opportunity cost of paying down the debt that we have.
Okay, so if we don't have the money in the traditional sense, the way that it's working for these other countries, and therefore we have increased risk as we invest the money we don't have, why does Trump want to do this? Why did Biden want to do this? Here's a story from before the election. Biden aides working on proposal for U.S. sovereign wealth fund. All right, they both wanted it. Well, that takes us to another major function of one of these funds, and that's influence. A viewer named Gordon had some concerns about this. He said, quote, sounds like a Trump slush fund that could be used to bypass congressional oversight or a gimmick to influence the stock market. And that might sound like these extreme examples, but they are some of the primary concerns held on both sides of the aisle with this issue, especially considering that government can already influence industry with tax breaks and grants and subsidies and that sort of thing. But traditionally, they go through Congress to do that. I spoke to someone from the Cato Institute about this part of the conversation.
Anything the federal government wants to accomplish, it can do so by going through Congress and authorizing spending for any particular program or priority that the president might have. A sovereign wealth fund seems like an unnecessary and illegitimate workaround to give the executive powers that should be properly reserved for Congress.
Now, pause 20-second for a second here, because I can feel you getting ready to send me an email with the title liberal hack or something like that. But I need to stress that the woman who you just saw getting interviewed there, who we talked to, is no liberal. Before she was with Cato, she was a director at the Heritage Foundation, you know, the right-wing think tank that developed Project 2025. And critics like her fear a bigger, more powerful executive branch with the potential for direct influence on private industry, regardless of the person or the party in the White House, could be a problem.
This becomes an avenue for corruption very easily, and it becomes for political favoritism. And so it really is this going to be run neutrally? Is this going to be run in a way that's to the political advantage of those in charge of it? And that's beyond the more basic point of this involving government picking winners and losers, which conservatives in particular have long sort of railed against.
So these are all important topics, but not really the most important question. For that one, we go to an email from a viewer named Chris. He asked who would control this fund and determine how it is spent. And right now, we have no idea. And until we do know those details, it really is hard to judge the pros and cons. According to the White House, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce will work with the President for economic policy to develop a plan. And you would think that a plan like that would then work its way through Congress, but who knows nowadays? We did an Order Up segment on this topic a couple weeks ago. It's on the WRAL YouTube page. My tie is crooked. You can watch it anytime you'd like. But you know, between that story and this one, we've really only scratched the surface. I mean, this is a gigantic story, a lot of different avenues to go down. So if you're interested and you want to learn some more, just let me know. Email Dan@WRAL.com. Tell me what's on your mind. And